said they're just fine, we can do without Obamacare. Let's hear his explanation of how he protects his family when it comes to health insurance. I don't think that's an unreasonable question. After all, he's the one who raised the issue. Madam President, I yield the floor.
That on the Senate floor yesterday, and today the U.S. Senate about to gavel in to get things started. More work expected on a bill providing temporary funding for the federal government from October 1st through December 15th, known as a continuing resolution, or CR. Up to 4 votes are scheduled for 12:30 Eastern today. That may include a vote on final passage. As written, the measure would also defund the health care law. Majority Leader Harry Reid has filed an amendment that would strip the health care law defunding language and would shorten the length of the CR from December 15th to November 15th. And now live to the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
Pray. Holy God, you created us for freedom, so keep us from shackling ourselves with the chains of dysfunction. Use our senators today to serve your purposes for this generation, making them ever mindful of their accountability to you. Lord, deliver us from governing by crisis, empowering us to be responsible stewards of your bounty, using judicious compromise for the mutual progress of all. Provide this land we love with your gracious protection, and may we never cease to be grateful for the numberless blessings we receive each day from your hands. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., September 27, 2013. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Angus S. King, Jr., a senator from the state of Maine, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will resume consideration of H.A. Res. 59, which is the continuing resolution. The time until 12:10 will be equally divided and controlled between the proponents and opponents of the motion and vote cloture. H.A. Res. 59. The time from 12:10 until 12:30 will be reserved for me and Senator McConnell. I'll control the last 10 minutes. He'll control the first 10 minutes of that block of time. Filing deadline for all second-degree amendments to H.A. Res. 59 is 10:30 a.m. today. At 12:30, there'll be up to 4 roll call votes in relation to the following order. Cloture, H.A. Res. 59, motion to waive budget points of order. The Reid Mikulski Amendment. We'll vote on that. Passage of the resolution as amended, if amended. Mr. President, as I indicated, I'm not going to give any remarks this morning. I want to leave as much time as possible to those who haven't had an opportunity to speak or wish to speak again. So I'm told the Republican leader won't be here either, so I'll return at approximately 12:20. I suggest the absence of quorum and ask the time be divided equally.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Could I suggest that maybe we need unanimous consent to do away with the quorum call since we never come into session?
Without objection. Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of H.J. Res. 59, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 195, House Joint Resolution 59, making appropriations, continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, the time until 12:10 p.m. will be equally divided between the proponents and opponents of the motion to invoke cloture.
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
Ask the further proceedings on the... Oh, we're not in quorum call. Mr. President, well, here we are. I guess this is like the movie High Noon. The two sides are walking down the street. I just hope that, like the movie High Noon, I hope the good guys win. In other words, I hope that reason and judiciousness and a sense of responsibility to the people of this country prevail, and not some knee-jerk reaction to what a few people in the House of Representatives want to do to our government. There seems to be a sense, Mr. President, among some members across the aisle here, and certainly among a block of Republicans in the House, that shutting down the federal government is no big deal. Well, I suppose if you are of an anarchist mind, which I think some of them may be, then you don't want government. You want to create chaos. You want to create confusion. Someone might ask, why would someone want to create chaos and confusion? Well, I think if you read your history, you'll find that most authoritarian governments and most authoritarian movements that are based upon a minority view or a minority support, they gain their power through confusion and chaos by disrupting the public body. I don't care whether it's authoritarian movements of the left or the right. That's what they do. They know they cannot gain power through the normal channels, especially in a democratic government. And so therefore, they do everything they can to skew the way government operates. First, you manipulate the district lines for how you elect members of the House of Representatives so that you have a lot of safe districts for one party. I got to hand it to the Republicans. They were very keen on this for the last 10 years or so, and they focused on redrawing these district boundaries so that they would have what we might call sinecures, a safe seat. But if you look at the election results of the last election, more Americans voted for Democratic members of the House than they voted for Republican members of the House. But the Republicans are in charge of the House. Well, that's because of the way the district lines were drawn after the last census was taken. And so that's one way you do it. You skew it that way. And then what happens is you bring a minority bloc of Tea Party-type people to the House of Representatives, and they want to sow more confusion and more chaos. because they know that's the only way their views are ever going to prevail. They will never prevail in the open marketplace of ideas and debate and discourse among the American people. Now, on what do I base that statement? Well, just look at the last election. A lot of what the Tea Party is proposing and what they're now doing in terms of focusing on shutting down the government, much of that was proposed by their candidate for president. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And I think the American people soundly rejected that. And so the Tea Party, being frustrated because they cannot get their way electorally or in the open marketplace of ideas and discourse and public debate, now see their only way to do it is to create confusion and chaos. Well, one might say that if they're doing that, well, then certainly the public will turn against them. Well, I think to a certain degree that's happening, but for the vast majority of Americans out there who go to work every day and work hard, raising their families, thinking about where the next paycheck's coming from or whether or not they're even going to have a job, young people getting out of school, mountains of debt, trying to get a job, start a family perhaps, they're not focusing on the everyday activities of what we do around here in Washington. They read the headlines. They may see the news or see something on their laptops or on their iPads or whatever. And what they see is a Congress that is muddled and mixed up and can't get anything done. And so you read the polls and the people blame all of us for this. And so I think the people in the Tea Party have seen that. And I think they believe that if they can create more confusion and chaos and disruption of government, that both sides will be blamed. And out of that, they believe somehow they can rise to the top of the heap and infuse the government with their minority views. And that's really what's happening here. It's a small group of willful men and women who have a certain ideology about how our country should run and what we should do, who cannot get their way in the normal, as I say, discourse and debate and votes, either here in the Congress or in the body politic writ large. And since they can't get their way, they're going to create this confusion and discourse and hope that the public will be so mixed up in who is to blame for this that they'll blame both sides. And perhaps they feel that their minority, which is so imbued with this passion of theirs, this ideology, this rigidness of ideology of theirs, that they're the ones who will come out in mass and vote in the next election. Other people will be so discouraged and they'll say, oh, a pox on both your houses, I won't vote. And therefore, that's the path they see to taking over government. It's dangerous. It's very dangerous. I believe, Mr. President, we are at one of the most dangerous points in our history right now. Every bit as dangerous as the breakup of the Union before the Civil War. We're at a point where will this Congress allow a small group, dedicated, I give them credit for working hard, but a small group of dedicated, ideologically driven individuals are able to dictate to the Senate and the House what our course of action is going to be. We just can't give in to that. So I call upon my friends in the Republican Party who are moderates, and there are a lot of them in my own state, around the country. They're conservative, but they are responsible conservatives. They may look at Democrats and say, you want to go too fast one way, we might want to go a little bit slower that way, or maybe we want to go in a slightly different direction, so let's get together and work it out, see which way we go. That's being a responsible conservative, or a responsible liberal, too, I would say. I call upon them to disabuse themselves of this idea that somehow they have to march in lockstep with this small band of Tea Party, call them what you will, right-wing ideologues. You can use whatever adjectives you want. But they must disabuse themselves of the idea that they have to somehow march in lockstep with them. Now, I keep reading the papers that somehow the Speaker of the House is trying to find a way out of this. Well, I don't know John Boehner real personally, but he was on the Education Labor Committee all the time I was on the committee here. And we always went to conference. We worked things out in a reasonable manner. There is a way forward. There is a way forward. And that is for the Speaker basically to take what we do here. What we're about to pass today is a stripped-down version of a continuing resolution that will keep the government running until November 15th. But it knocks out all that other junk the House put in about defunding Obamacare and all this other stuff they put in there. It's just a straightforward, let's keep the government running until November 15th. Now, the compromise we made on our part was to give up on our budget line. We had a certain level that we wanted to fund the government. The Republicans had a lower level, so we accepted the lower level. We accepted that lower level. And in turn, we asked, rather than going till December 15th, go to November 15th on this continuing resolution of funding the government. So we accepted the lower level. Hard for some of us to swallow. I didn't believe in that lower level. I thought it should be higher so that we could adequately fund things like education, health care, National Institutes of Health, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, all the things, transportation infrastructure. But in the spirit of compromise, we took the lower level, and we said, let's go to November 15th so that we can bring our appropriations bills out on the floor, hopefully between now and then, and we can work on an overall spending package for next year. One that's not just a continuing resolution that just keeps things going, but maybe we want to make some changes, and we do. I know in my committee we wanted to change some things, hopefully make them work better. And so by doing that, by November 15th, then that gives us a month from November 15th, let's say till Christmas, to get it all worked out and hopefully have this package passed by Christmas. If we go to December 15th, we won't have the time to do that. We won't have the time to do that. So that's what's before us today. Now here is the Speaker's avenue to act responsibly and to let the American people know that there are responsible Republicans. All he has to do is take the bill that we pass here on the floor and bring it up on the House floor. And encourage some of his more moderate Republicans to support it and get the Democrats to support it, and they pass it in a bipartisan fashion. However, if the Speaker wants to then just cater to this small band of ideologues, well, then he'll take what we pass here, change it around, add this, add that. I hear they got a laundry list, and then send it back to us. That's totally irresponsible. So there is a path forward. It's the path of responsibility, of being responsible, being judicious, not giving in to a small band of ideologues who want to sow confusion and discord, a small band of ideologues who want to use the power of the minority, to use what they can do to disrupt government in order to get their way. You know, when we were kids, there was always some kid that was in playing marbles with you or whatever it was, playing games, who didn't get his way, and so they picked up and went home, threw a temper tantrum. Well, for kids who are out playing, as we did in the fields, in small communities, temper tantrums were something you lived with. Didn't really do much harm. But that's not true here in the Congress. We cannot afford the temper tantrums of a few ideologues. There's more I could say about what they want to do and how they want to nullify laws by doing this. We have the Affordable Care Act. We passed it here. It's being implemented. Been a lot written about the exchanges starting next week. Well, it's the law of the land. It's been upheld by the Supreme Court. Yet a small man, a small group, a few on this side, not everyone, just a few on the Republican side here and some in the House side, want to nullify that law. Not through votes. They want to nullify it by shutting down the government or by not paying our bills when the debt ceiling comes and defaulting on our debt. Nullification of a law through that type of action. That's sort of like picking up your marbles and going home. But when you're a kid, no one really gets hurt. But who gets hurt from this? The American people. I think there's a lot of people who say, well, shutting down the government's no big deal. It is a big deal. OMB recently estimated that in 1996, when the government shut down, it cost, in today's dollars, $2.1 billion. Just because of a few days of the shutdown of government. So those who say that they are fiscal conservatives had to think about that, what the cost would be to the American people shutting it down. But I'll end on this. Mr. President, I happen to be privileged to chair the Appropriations Committee that funds things like Head Start programs, early child development programs, elementary education, Pell Grants, student loans, medical research. I can tell you that if the government shuts down, a lot of people are going to get hurt. 22 Head Start providers will be delayed. About 18,000 kids will be denied Head Start programs. The National Institutes of Health will not be able to fund new biomedical research projects. Social Security offices will close. Every day in this country, 445,000 people call their Social Security office. They've got a missing check. They've got something wrong. They need some help. When the government shuts down, they won't be able to call their Social Security office and get that kind of help. So I could go on and on, Mr. President, but this is not a game. This is not a game, and hopefully we're not children. Hopefully we are responsible adults. I believe what we're doing today is responsible in passing a stripped-down continuing resolution to keep the government going until November 15th. I understand that we'll have the votes to do that. I just hope that the House of Representatives will be responsible and forget about kids' games like picking up your marbles and going home or throwing a temper tantrum or shutting down the government because you can't get your way. This is a dangerous time, and I just hope that the members of this body, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, in which I was privileged to serve for 10 years, will rise to the occasion and let the American people know that we are going to act responsibly. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, I yield 10 minutes of proponent time to Senator Cornyn.
Mr. President, just a parliamentary inquiry. I understand that there's been time allocated to proponents and opponents, but there's no breakdown for individual speakers in terms of how much time is allocated.
Senator's correct.
Mr. President, Obamacare is more unpopular today than it was when it was passed in 2010. And I know the proponents of Obamacare are Democratic friends who voted for it in a party line vote, had hoped that it would meet their expectations and the promises that the President and other people made about how it would be implemented and what its impact would be on our health care system. I'm amazed, though, that our colleagues say, it's the law of the land, and we can't change it.
Well, that's completely contrary to our constitutional system, where the very legitimacy of our laws depend on the consent of the governed, and of course, it's within the power of Congress to change the law. That's what we do. When the law turns out that it doesn't work as those who hoped it would, or it unfortunately meets the expectations of those skeptics like me who thought it would never work. So it is within our power to change this law, and we will be voting today on a very important provision which will give us an opportunity to start over again, to address the failures of Obamacare that even some of its most ardent advocates had hoped it would meet. So today we will vote on a number of matters, including a cloture vote on the underlying bill. I will be voting yes on cloture because I don't understand how I can otherwise vote on a matter that I want to see passed. In other words, we will vote to proceed to a bill that defunds Obamacare, and I believe we should defund Obamacare. Indeed, just as we did on the motion to proceed, we had 100 senators vote for cloture on the motion to proceed. I don't know why we wouldn't vote to proceed on the cloture vote on the underlying bill, especially those of us who believe that we ought to go ahead and defund Obamacare today in light of experience between 2010 and 2013, which shows it hasn't lived up to expectations and promises. Now, there's some people across America that are so upset with Obamacare, and I understand their frustration, that they say we ought to shut down the federal government. Well, our colleague, Senator Coburn, asked the Congressional Research Service to look at what would happen to Obamacare if the government shut down for some reason. Their conclusion is that Obamacare would continue to be funded even though the government were shut down, because there are alternate sources of revenue that could be used to keep it going. So I say to my friends who say we ought to shut the government down to get rid of Obamacare that it won't work. Even if they hope that it would work, it won't work. And of course, we can imagine the disruption to our seniors and military and to our economy, which is bouncing along the bottom with slow growth, high unemployment, and what that disruption might mean there. So I think the real vote today is going to be on the vote that the majority leader will offer to strip out the defunding language. And I hope that we have 5 Democrats, perhaps those who hoped in 2010 that Obamacare would actually work, but in light of subsequent experience will reconsider and say maybe we ought to start over again because Obamacare has not worked. And maybe it's not the best way to make health care policy to have a bill that is strictly a party line vote, because no one's invested then in trying to actually make sure that it will work, as when Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan fixed Social Security and secured it for subsequent generations. Unfortunately, we've seen the President of the United States governed by waiver, exception, and exemption when it comes to implementing Obamacare. We have learned that Obamacare is not ready for prime time, even though the exchanges are supposed to go into effect next Tuesday. So why are the American people so upset with Obamacare? Why are there some people who are so upset they're willing to see the government shut down in order to get rid of it and change it? Well, it's simply because when the President was promoting his health care overhaul in 2009 and 2010, he repeatedly assured the American people that if you like what you have, you can keep it. If you like your doctor, you don't have to worry, nothing will change. He made that promise time and time and time again. And he was always 100% unequivocal. Here's a direct quote from the President's speech in June of 2009 before the American Medical Association. He said, quote, "If you like your doctor, you'll be able to keep your doctor period. If you like your health plan, you'll be able to keep your health plan, period. No one will take it away, no matter what, close quote. Now, that's the President of the United States. When the President made these remarks 4 years ago, many Americans believed him, or at least gave him the benefit of the doubt. Unfortunately, we now know that Obamacare was sold to the American people under false pretenses. The Congressional Budget Office has projected that Obamacare will cause millions of Americans to lose their existing health care coverage. Employers large and small have already announced that because of Obamacare, they're ending their employer-provided coverage for their employees and some of their retirees. In a front-page story, even the New York Times admits that because of Obamacare, quote, many insurers are significantly limiting the number of doctors and hospitals available to consumers. So if you like your doctor, you like your hospital, you won't necessarily be able to keep them. For that matter, earlier this year, one of my constituents sent me a letter that she got from her insurance company informing her that because of Obamacare, the coverage that she had would be terminated by the end of 2013. That letter said, quote, never have we experienced the uncertainty and immense challenges that confront the insurance industry during this time of health care reform. Mr. President, it's now painfully clear that many people who do want to keep their existing coverage, who do want to keep their current doctor, will not be able to do so if this law is implemented. And that's why we're seeing some leading Democrats who are saying, you know, maybe we ought to reconsider in the light of experience since the time we voted to pass Obamacare in 2009 and 2010. It's also clear that Obamacare is destroying our economy. Recently, a group of labor leaders went to the White House to ask for a special carve-out because they said that Obamacare, as implemented, was killing the 40-hour work week. Now, these were some of the folks who were the biggest cheerleaders for Obamacare at the time it passed, but they have realized, based on subsequent experience, that it is making full-time work into part-time work so that employers can avoid some of the penalties and costs. And we know that it's having a particular impact on some specific types of employment, like restaurants, retailers, hotels, the people who develop medical devices which save lives and increase lifespan, and it's having a negative impact on hospitals as well. For example, the Franciscan Alliance Health System recently announced that because of Obamacare, it was eliminating about 125 jobs in President Obama's hometown of Chicago. Meanwhile, in a recent letter to a D.C. city councilman, the owner of a popular Washington area restaurant chain described Obamacare as the biggest mandated cost ever inflicted on restaurateurs. In the history of restaurants, he said. This restaurant owner added, we still haven't figured out how we're going to pay for it. And as I mentioned a moment ago, because of the tax on medical devices to pay for Obamacare, medical device manufacturers are leaving the United States, or they're not hiring new people. I had some from Texas come in to see me and say they have an operation in Costa Rica, and they're going to be, instead of hiring more people in Texas, they're going to be moving that operation to Costa Rica for one reason and one reason only, and that's to avoid the medical device tax in Obamacare. And we know that because of Obamacare's impact on the economy, many college graduates who advocates celebrate are now able to stay on their parents' health insurance until they're 26. Those same young men and women are unable to find jobs because of Obamacare. And we know that its impact on the medical profession is having a dramatic outcome on people's access to health care. It's very important to make a distinction between coverage and access. So just because the government provides Medicare coverage doesn't mean you're going to find a doctor to see you. It doesn't mean because you're covered by Medicaid that you're going to be able to find a doctor to see you. And increasingly in my state and around the country, doctors are saying, you know what, we can't afford to see new Medicare and Medicaid patients because of how much the government compensates for that service. Matter of fact, in Texas, only about 1 out of every 3 doctors who currently sees Medicaid patients will accept a new Medicaid patient because of the low reimbursement rate. So Medicaid is already failing to meet the important needs of the most vulnerable people in our country. But because of Obamacare, states are preparing for a massive spike in individual health premiums. And because of Obamacare, insurance providers are already limiting consumer choice. As we learned years ago, or many of us warned years ago, Obamacare affects everyone. It affects working families who are happy with their employer-provided coverage. It affects Medicare recipients living on a fixed income. It affects Medicaid patients who are already having trouble finding doctors and dentists who will take their insurance. And it affects young people who are struggling to pay off their student loan debt. And yes, as I said, it affects small business owners who want to expand their workforce.
Consume 10 minutes just for information.
I thank the Chair. It affects medical device companies who produce technology that's helped millions of Americans with disabilities. The false promises of Obamacare have been shattered by the harsh realities of Obamacare. A law that was supposed to solve some of our biggest health care problems in the country has instead made those problems even worse. Now we have a second chance. Congress has a second chance as the elected representatives of the American people under our constitutional system of learning from the experience we've had since 2010 when Congress passed Obamacare on a party line vote. So we have a second chance today to do the right thing, a chance to stop Obamacare in its tracks, a chance to reverse the mistakes of 2009, and to allow Congress instead to pass real health care reforms that will lower costs, improve access, and expand quality insurance to more people. Republicans have said we have an alternative to Obamacare. Some of our colleagues who support Obamacare said, well, the only way you can cover people with pre-existing diseases, pre-existing conditions, is Obamacare, a $2.7 trillion expenditure. That's baloney. We all know many states have health risk pools, and if we provided additional funding to those state health risk pools, people with pre-existing conditions could get coverage without having to embrace the whole behemoth of Obamacare and at much more affordable cost. We're eager to adopt reforms such as equalizing the tax treatment of health insurance, to make health care price and quality information more transparent and accessible so people can actually shop based on quality and price. What a concept. By letting people buy insurance across state lines and allowing both individuals and businesses to form risk pools for individual markets. By curbing frivolous medical malpractice lawsuits. And as I said, using state-based health insurance pools to cover people with pre-existing conditions. To give states more flexibility to improve Medicaid and to bring more competition to Medicare. Republicans have spent years advocating these policies, and now that we know that Obamacare has failed in its intended purpose, it's time to look to these alternatives. We're prepared to defund Obamacare and to move ahead with real reform like I described. The only question is today, how many Democrats are going to learn from the evidence since 2010? How many of them are going to listen to their constituents and say we can do better than this failed attempt for the federal government to take over our health care system and deny people access to their doctors of their choice and to keep the insurance coverage They have. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, I yield 10 minutes of proponent time to Senator Sanders.
Senator from Vermont.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me begin by saying I think a debate over Obamacare, a debate over health care is good for the nation. Because I think, as many Americans understand, the United States today is the only country in the industrialized world that does not guarantee health care as a right to all of our people. And today, before the initiation of Obamacare, we have 48 million people who have no health insurance. And I would tell my good friend from Texas that the state of Texas, I think, ranks first in the country in the percentage of their people under 65 who have no health insurance. 1 out of 4. George W. Bush was president for 8 years. Where were the ideas about how we provide health care to all of our people? And it's not just 48 million people today who have no health insurance. There are many more who have huge deductibles, which prevent them from going to the doctor. They have high co-payments. And at the end of the day, Mr. President, in this dysfunctional health care system that we have, we are spending almost twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of any other nation, many of which have better health care outcomes than we do in terms of life expectancy, infant mortality, and the treatment of a number of diseases. In my view, Obamacare is a step forward, but we have got to make significant improvements. And that's a good discussion and debate to have. But one thing is absolutely certain, is you do not hold the American people hostage by threatening to shut down the government, or for the first time in the history of our country, not paying our bills and bringing this country and perhaps the entire world into a major financial crisis. That is what you don't do. Obamacare was passed with 60 votes in the Senate. It was passed in the House. It was signed by the President. Obamacare was challenged in the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled it constitutional. There was an election a year ago on this very issue, one of the major issues in the campaign. And the Republican candidate said, let's defund Obamacare. He lost the election. Republicans lost seats in the Senate. They lost seats in the House. And that's what democracy is about. What democracy is not about is a handful of members of the House of Representatives, extreme right-wing Republicans, saying if we do not get our way, we are prepared to punish tens of millions of Americans. Yeah, we lost the election. Yeah, we lost seats in the House and the Senate. But we are prepared to bring this government down. We are prepared to cause perhaps a major global financial crisis unless we get our way. That is not what the American system is about. That's not what democracy is about. So if we want a debate about how we improve Obamacare, good debate. Let's have it. But let's not tell men and women in the United States Armed Forces who today are putting their lives on the line to defend us that they're not going to get paid. Let us not tell police officers here in Washington and elsewhere they may not get paid. Let's not tell working families who take their little kids into Head Start so they can then go out to work that that program may be killed. Let's not tell senior citizens who are on the Meals on Wheels program, who can't leave their homes, who depend upon a meal. Let's not punish them because you got a small number of extreme right-wingers who want to get their way at the expense of millions and millions of people. So, Mr. President, yeah, let's have a debate. Continue the debate. Obamacare will provide health insurance to 20 million more Americans. Good step forward. 28 million more remain uninsured. Many of the trade unions are concerned about provisions, and I share those views. Let's change that. Let's improve it. But let us not shut down the United States government and make us look like fools throughout the entire world because a handful of right-wing extremists are so determined to try to destroy this president. Mr. President, Senator Cruz was on the floor the other day, and I appreciate anyone. I was on the floor a couple of years ago for 8.5 hours. He was on the floor for 21 hours. That's tough, and I respect anyone who can do that. And I disagree with most of what he did say. But what he did say one thing which I think was right, and that is that we need a serious debate about fundamental issues. And, Mr. President, what I believe very strongly is that this debate about Obamacare is kind of small change, nickel and dime, compared to where many of our right-wing Republicans really want to go. And it is important that we have that debate because I think the American people are not understanding the role that multi-billionaires like the Koch brothers, worth some $70 billion, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into the Tea Party, really what this debate is about. And it's a lot more than Obamacare. And let me just tell you some of the issues that are out there that we should be debating. Senator Cruz was right. The Texas Republican Party platform calls for an immediate and orderly transition away from Social Security. In other words, they want to kill Social Security. That's a good debate. Let's have it. How many of the American people think that we should end Social Security and go back to the days of the 1920s when the elderly people were the poorest people in America? That is what right-wing Republicans want to do. Let us have that debate. Republicans in Texas, and again, their view represents a whole lot of folks here in the Senate and in the House. They want to privatize veterans' health care. I'm the chairman of the Veterans Committee, and I will tell you very strongly that the veterans of America want to improve and expand the VA health care system, not privatize it. Let's have that debate. Mr. President, the Republican Party in Texas, and again, reflecting the views of, I believe, a strong majority of Republicans here in Washington, they believe, and I quote from the Texas platform, "We believe the minimum wage should be repealed," end of quote. Minimum wage today is $7.25 an hour. You got millions and millions of workers who are trying to get by on $8 an hour, $9 an hour. I think the minimum wage should be significantly expanded, raised. Republicans, many Republicans say let's abolish the minimum wage. Do you know what that means? It means in Maine, in high unemployment areas, in Detroit, in high unemployment areas, in Vermont, in high unemployment areas, what the employer will say, look, there ain't no jobs around here. You want to work? Here's $3 an hour. But we got the government out of your lives. There's no longer a minimum wage. They consider that freedom. I consider that wage slavery. Let's have the debate about whether we should abolish the minimum wage, abolish Social Security. The Ryan budget, Republican budget in the House, a couple of years ago wanted to end Medicare as we know it, create a voucher system. Here's a check, $8,000. You got cancer, good luck. Here's your $8,000 check. Go to the doctor, go to the hospital. You'll get good care for about 2 days, and then we don't know what happens to you. We're going to end Medicare as we know it. We're going to make devastating cuts in Medicaid. We're going to give more tax breaks to the rich at a time when the rich are doing phenomenally well and the middle class is collapsing. Let's have that debate. That is a good debate to have. The other thing, Mr. President, it's very interesting. There was a CBS New York Times poll that came out the other day, absolutely consistent with every other poll that I have seen. And what these polls do is they say to the American people, what do you think are the most important issues facing America? What should Congress be focusing on? You know what? They're not talking about health care. They're not talking about Obamacare. They're not talking about taxes. What the American people are saying is we need jobs. Real unemployment today is close to 14%. Youth unemployment is higher. We need to create millions of jobs. Where is the debate? We bring forward ideas about rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, creating jobs. moving to a more energy-efficient society, creating jobs. Where are their ideas on jobs? They don't have any. All they could say is, let's give more tax breaks to billionaires. 1 out of 4 corporations doesn't pay any taxes. Let's give more tax breaks to the rich and the corporations. Trickle-down economics has not worked. Mr. President, what the American people also understand is that most of the new jobs that are being created are low-wage jobs. Often they're part-time jobs, a trend, by the way, that has been going on for many, many years, well before Obamacare. Major employers didn't need to figure out that if you hire people for 25, 28 hours a week, you don't have to provide them with benefits. Let's discuss about how we create decent wages in this country.
The senator's yielded time has expired.
Last point I would make. Maybe the most important discussion we should have is ending and overturning this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decisions, which give the billionaires in this country the ability to control what goes on here in the United States Congress, forcing members of the House and Senate to raise unbelievable sums of money. So there's a lot to be debating about, but one thing we should not be debating about is shutting down the United States government in order to achieve a narrow political goal. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Alabama.
I would like to use 15 minutes of the opponent time and be notified at 10 minutes.
Senator is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, what we're here today about is that the Democratic majority in the Senate has built a fortress around the Obamacare Affordable Care Act legislation. They have refused steadfastly any serious reevaluation of it. They've blocked every attempt to do that. And the House and Senator Cruz and Republicans and others are trying to force this Congress to confront the obvious flaws in that legislation. And they have refused to do so. And so that's why it's all come down to a debate at the end of the year over what are we going to do. Do we just give up? Do we allow the majority in the Senate not even to allow votes in the weeks to come? They're not. They will not do it unless they're forced to. They've made a strategic decision to reject and fight off any attempt to bring up a vote in the floor of the Senate. People cannot believe, I'm sure, in America, that if a member of the United States Senate desires to try to fix and improve the Affordable Care Act, that they cannot get the floor and get a vote on it. That is exactly what's been happening ever since it passed. Polling data shows American people want substantial changes in it. And members, even Democrats, have said they want some change. But nothing gets voted on that will actually make a real change in the bill. It's President Obama, Senator Reid's plan to accept no changes. Indeed, Senator Reid has made clear his plan is moved to a single payer that he said openly and publicly just a few weeks ago, a single payer for all health care in America, the United States government. And that can only be described as a socialized medicine. That's what the goal is. And we have got to confront this. So I want to say that first of all. But as ranking member of the Budget Committee, I wanted to share a few thoughts about where we are financially and what's going to happen with this, this legislation. First and foremost, we have to know that the Affordable Care Act is deeply unsound financially. The President's promise, repeatedly made, that he would not add one dime to the debt. In the State of the Union, he said that. He said he would not add one dime to the debt now or ever, period, close quote. Is that true? No, sir, it's not true. This is a hugely unsound new entitlement program that will endanger the financial future of America at a time when we need to quit digging ourselves deeper in debt and begin to work ourselves out of debt. The president's on the Budget Committee. We don't know these numbers. So we are dealing with Social Security, desperately trying to figure a way to make Social Security sound so our seniors can go to bed at night and not have any worries about the future of their Social Security. Medicare is even more stressed. And now we're adding this bill, the Obamacare legislation. What does it do? The Government Accountability Office, headed by an independent person, actually appointed by President Obama, has issued a report under the likely financial scenario over the next 75 years, and that's how they figure Social Security and Medicare's liabilities. They conclude that this bill will add $6.3 trillion to the debt of the United States. Social Security's unfunded liabilities are only 7.7. We're talking about adding almost as much unfunded liabilities to the future of the United States and to our children and grandchildren as Social Security has. And we need to be fixing Social Security, not adding another one. We need to be fixing Medicare, not adding another one. We need to be fixing some of our pension liability plans that are unsound, not adding more debt. And we were promised it wouldn't happen. So we're going to have a budget point of order coming up later, and you're going to hear arguments that this bill makes money. And this is how a country goes broke. This is how a country goes broke. We're going to have a score from the Congressional Budget Office that says over 10 years, this bill will bring in more money than goes out. And in one sense, that's correct. But where did they get the money? The money, $500 billion or so, is coming out of Medicare. And it's Medicare's money. They're cutting doctors and hospitals, providers, $500 billion. And they're saying, therefore, that the U.S. Unified Treasury, the conventions of accounting, as CBO says, will, that shows is increased money. Therefore, it can be spent by an entirely new program. But it's not the new program U.S. Treasury's money. It's not Congress's money. This is Medicare's money, and it will be loaned by the Medicare trustees to the U.S. Treasury so it can be spent on this program. So the Obamacare money that comes out of the Medicare savings is borrowed money. It's not free money. It's not new money. It's borrowed. Borrowed from the trustees of Medicare, and it's headed in a downward spiral, and they'll call those loans in very soon. There's just no money there. And that's how it all comes out. The Government Accountability Office says that it will add $6 trillion, $6.3 trillion to the unfunded liabilities of America. Mr. Holtz-Aiken said in the first 10 years that it will be $500 billion added to the debt of America. So they will contend otherwise, but it's indisputable that this is so. And we're adding to the debt. It's unfunded, and it's going to threaten the future of America. I would also point out that as we work our way through the entire effort to focus on our debt and what we'll do for America, we need to understand how this accounting works. The Congressional Budget Office, December 23rd, the night before the bill passed in 2011, in response to my request, sent a letter. And they said you cannot simultaneously use the money from Medicare and fund a new program, though the conventions of accounting might indicate that. You cannot use it for both purposes. They used the phrase it was double counting. That's our own Congressional Budget Office. The night before this bill was rammed through the Senate, they told us that. But yet we still have the President, we still have members of this body insisting that this bill is fully paid for and won't add to the debt ever, period. Nothing could be more false. Nothing could be more false. So when we deal, I know there's good people feel like we've got to keep this process moving, we've got to send something to the House, and they'll want to move this bill to the House. I understand that, but I just want everybody to know that I know and we all need to fully understand this bill is unsound financially. This health care plan will never work. Second, I am disappointed in our colleagues in the House have sent a bill over that spends at a rate that would add $20 billion more to our debt than the Budget Control Act would allow. Colleagues, we have got to be so careful about this. I know they have an excuse for it. I know they say that by the end of the year the sequester will cut those spending levels down and it won't add to the debt at the end of the year. Don't worry about it, they say, but right now we couldn't agree, so we just spent more money on the discretionary side than we should have otherwise. We're going to spend $988 billion instead of $968 billion. $20 billion more at that rate. But they say after 3 months or 2 months when this CR ends, they will all be fixed. But I'm worried about that, Mr. President. It's going to be harder, I think. I think the pressure is going to be more intense 2 months from now to keep spending at that level. I don't think they should have sent a bill to this floor, even though they can correctly argue that if current sequester laws stay in effect, it will be reduced. They can continue to argue that, I recognize. But fundamentally...
The Senator has consumed 10 minutes.